All right, so as you can see, the title of this first presentation is A Church of Discipleship Groups. So a church of discipleship groups is a two-winged church, okay? It's a two-winged church. What does that mean? What that means, the two wings represent the community meeting in two ways, meeting in small groups and large groups, okay? Small groups and large groups. And discipleship groups are based on the Acts experience in Acts chapter 2. So actually, let's open up our Bibles and we can just read quickly through Acts chapter 2. We won't go through the whole chapter. So Acts chapter 2. I think if we begin with verse 40 to 47. Somebody read verse 40 to 47. Acts chapter 2, verse 40 to 47.
And with many other words he testified and exhorted them, saying, Be saved from this perverse generation. Then those who gladly received his word were baptized. And that day about 3,000 souls were added to them. And they continued steadfastly in the apostles' doctrine and fellowship, and the breaking of bread and in prayers. Then fear can open every soul, and many wonders and signs were done through the apostles. Now all who believed were together and had all things in common, and sold their possessions and goods, and divided among all, as anyone had need. So continuing daily with one accord in the temple, and breaking bread from house to house, they ate their food with gladness and simplicity of heart, praising God and having favor with all the people. And the Lord added to the church daily those who were being saved.
Okay, so notice how it says that in verse 42, well, actually, in verse 41, is they gladly received his word, and about 3,000 souls were added, right? So this was the first explosive growth that the church started to experience. And it says that they continued steadfastly in the apostles' doctrine. So what they learned from the apostles concerning the apostles' doctrine, where did they get it from? Where did the apostles get their doctrine from? Exactly, right? So in other words, they continued steadfastly in the teachings of Jesus. And notice it says, and fellowship, right? So in the same manner that Jesus fellowshiped with his apostles, okay, he taught them, they transmitted that to the church. They met in the same manner, in breaking of bread and also in prayers. And as a result of the way they met, right? Because when you're in close fellowship with people and you get to know people more and more, that's when you have an opportunity to learn to love people. And when we love one another, what happens? the Spirit of God breaks out, right? The Holy Spirit breaks out. And so notice what happens in verse 43. It says, then fear came upon every soul, and many wonders and signs were done through the apostles. Okay? And there was this spirit of camaraderie in that the Spirit fell upon those who had much means, where they were able to give up much of their plenty so that everyone could have. Just imagine being a part of a church like that, right? And then here's the key in verse 46. So continuing daily with one accord in harmony in the temple and breaking bread from house to house. And so that's what we're going to focus on. We're going to key on that. And so continuing daily with one accord in the temple and breaking bread from house to house. This is the two-winged experience of the New Testament church. This is how they did church. Okay? So as a result of the Acts 2 experience, the church was able to overcome persecution, penetrate the world, equip the saints. It was able to change society. They worshiped God, edified itself, and trained leaders. Okay? How was this possible? This was possible because they had special wine, the presence of Christ. Okay? They had special wine. And they also had special wineskins. What is the special wineskins that they had? Not only large group community, but small group community as well. Okay? The special wineskins that they had was not only large group community like we mainly have in this day and age, but also small group community as all. So as a result of this special wineskin, Matthew 9 verse 17 says, both the wine and the wineskins are preserved. In other words, the implication is that if you don't have the special wine, then what's going to be going into the wineskins? What's going to be going into the special wineskins is heresy or falsities, right? Taking it the other way, if we don't have the special wineskins, even if we have the truth, the wineskins will burst and the truth can be lost. Okay? But when we have both the wine and the wineskins, the special, both are preserved. That's what Matthew 9, verse 17 teaches us. So the New Testament church was a balanced church. Okay? It's a church that met in corporate community and group community. This is how they did church. All right? This is how they did church. This is a church of discipleship groups. All right? An unbalanced church is what we mainly see today. Okay? Where it's overbalanced, where it leans more on the corporate side. All right? The church mainly meets in large groups, right? Like the Halifax Church, right? Which is one of our larger churches in the Maritime Conference, or the Moncton Church, right? It's 200 something odd people. What are some of the drawbacks of corporate community? What are some of the drawbacks? Anyone?
Individuals get left out.
Individuals get left out, right? People fall through the cracks. Yeah. Anyone else? Yeah. Cold, right? Yeah.
Lack of commitment.
Lack of commitment. Okay. Yeah.
People that want to be active can be overlooked too easy because many of these churches have established
Yeah.
groups of people that
Yep.
do things.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
You don't know your church member well,
Exactly.
and
Right?
yeah, then also you don't know who your visitor is to be able to communicate. And
Exactly. Exactly. So when you have a church that's overbalanced on the corporate side, right? So we talk about, you know, um, churches can be cold. Sometimes it's because the people are cold. Okay. Sometimes the people are not the nicest people. But sometimes it's not so much because it's not because the people are unpleasant, but rather, as Pui rightly pointed out, you don't know each other. You don't know each other. So, you know, we walk in, happy Sabbath, how are you? Okay. And how, right? And you may be having the worst day of your life. You know, it's just, how are you? Is everything okay? Wonderful. And you, right? That's because you have all these numbers of people. But that is the nature of the beast with a large group setting. Okay? So, but you also have an unbalanced church if you meet more towards what you focus on the group community, like something called house churches. What are some of the drawbacks that we can encounter with a house church?
Most of the ones I've seen, they have their own little paradise of worship, and there's no way for them to reach non-believers outside. They just get content with their little community. And also, too many of the house churches I've seen start to get ideas about the bigger organization that they lose trust in the church itself.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and become very critical, and then you have this mindset of us against them, right? You have this mindset of superiority, right? And I would visit a house church from time to time. I enjoyed the company of the people, but I was also going there to observe. I wanted to see, I wonder if this is how, and exactly the things that we've been discussing is exactly how things began to play out. Where, to the point, the people that are a part of this house church, they have nothing to do with the larger community. They're very critical, right? But it started off with this great idea, you know, everyone is going to be free to express themselves without any hit back, and it was just very novel. But after some time, you began to recognize, well, no, the atmosphere here is not one of where you can just express yourself and not be in fear of reprisals, right? So both are unhealthy, okay? Both are unhealthy when there is an overbalance, whether it's towards the corporate community or whether it's towards the group community. This is why Jesus established his church in this manner. A two-winged church, a balanced church, where there is corporate community and group community. And both meet various or specific needs that the other cannot meet. Okay? So, what are some of the differences between a traditional church? When I'm talking about a traditional church, I'm talking about the majority of Seventh-day Adventist churches in the North American division, probably around the world, right? That's a traditional church where they mainly meet in large group community, right? What are some of the differences? Well, some of the differences we discussed. Traditional churches incorporate small groups into its programs. How many of you have had the privilege of being a part of a small group? Right? Yeah. And it's been a good, was it a good experience? Right? And how long did it last?
COVID ended.
Right? Till COVID ended, or if it was before COVID, it was probably a couple months, right? A few months. You did sometimes churches form a small group, where couples come together and it's on marriage enrichment, right? And oftentimes what people report is in that small group, the people get closer together, they get to know one another. But after the small group is over, okay, it's back to business as usual, right? A church of discipleship groups builds their ecclesiology on New Testament principles, okay? New Testament principles, Acts chapter 2, all right? The traditional church has a biblical theology for all it does except for the way it functions, okay? So everything we do at the Halifax church, right, is theologically on point, right? We have a biblical theology for all that we do. At the Dartmouth church, at the Acts church, right? Except for the way it functions. In that, either we have not, in those various churches, we have not encountered, we have not learned, or we're not necessarily interested in trying to adopt this new way of doing church, which is not new. It's actually the original Christian way, how Jesus established the church. Yes, Marina.
If we may go back to slide number 12, can you give an example of one and the other so that it's only this but not that?
It's only...
Traditional churches incorporate small groups into its programs.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds very good.
Mm-hmm.
Why is it bad? In what context, for what situation would you say this would not be the best solution? And discipleship group churches build their ecclesiology on New Testament principles. Is it only Acts? What is the difference between the two in the putting together the little groups?
Okay, so the reason why Jesus established the church in them is he knew that both would be needed for the growth, maturity, and nurture of the church. There's very little, if any, relational intimacy in the large group setting, right? In the small group setting, you have room for that. In the large group setting, the focus is the greatness of God or the glory of God, right? So you would have the proclamation of a message, powerful message or, right? Or what have you. But with the proclamation of that message, relationships aren't being nurtured. Okay? Whereas with the small group community, relationships are being nurtured. So let me give you one example. We, in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, we are good at evangelism. We're good. We have like the top evangelist on the planet. Okay? We're known for that in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Okay? But we know that there is a saying that they come in the front door and they they go out the back door, right? We lose an incredible amount of people who come in the front door to the back door, right? And when you look at statistics, for example, as to why people leave the church, most people do not leave the church because of doctrine. There's a very small, there's a minority of people who leave because, oh, I don't agree with this truth, or they start to fall into false doctrine. Most leave as a result of some sort of relational issue. They don't feel any love, they feel left out, right? So what we've done is we baptize people, they come in.
Yeah, I see the difference between the traditional and small group church. But the first point here says traditional churches incorporate small groups into its programs, which is perfect.
Mm-hmm.
Why is it not?
Okay, why is it not? Because, okay.
We still have small groups, they are still incorporated.
Right, because it's just a program. It's something that comes and goes.
And it's not the whole
It's
thing.
not a permanent structure. It's not a permanent fixture.
It takes 10-15% instead of 80-90%. Is that the issue?
Okay, so what the issue is when the small group program comes to an end, the relational care comes to an end.
Okay, now I see.
Right? When it comes to an end, the relational care, you have all these new members coming in, but there's no structure that is there to care for them and to nurture them in a relational manner. They come in, there's preaching and so forth. The best thing that can happen to them is you have a well-meaning family that will kind of bring them in, right? Gonna bring you in. Good?
Yes.
Good. So great question. Great question.
Oh, yes. I'm trying to take all this information into
Mhm.
my brain, right? But I'm thinking about my church back to Mexico,
Mm-hmm.
where I come from.
Mm-hmm.
We were about 200 members,
Mm-hmm.
and 400 in total. We have two services,
Mhm.
one in the morning, one in the afternoon. And I was thinking, it is really the traditional church is not working, or is what I'm seeing here in
Or is it the
in-
people in North America?
or is it or North America? Because
Yeah, true.
you thinking that
Yes,
as
true
well?
with us, yes.
Because I'm seeing over there, we had all these departments,
Mm.
and I knew the people. I knew the people for service 1. I was in the service 1. I knew the people for service 2.
Mm-hmm.
And it didn't feel like a cold church. It didn't feel like we were knowing each other.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, like you say, some people come, they baptize, and they left. But Jesus said that
Yep.
seeds will become in the good land,
Mm-hmm.
and seeds we drop in the when the seeds cannot grow.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So we will have a lot of this. So I'm thinking to go to this idea, because back home it's still working. Church has so much programs to integrate
Mm-hmm.
every member, and I was thinking we had master guys, we had Pathfinders, we had the Pen Church, we had AY, we had
Women's
That's
ministry.
fine.
Vespers,
Mhm.
woman ministry, Dorcas,
Mhm.
men ministry, all this, and they are active,
Mm-hmm.
and they are active. And we had also, we had this, I never see this happen here since I live in Canada. We had fast. We go one Friday,
Mhm.
then we will be until midnight fasting and praying and singing and reading, studying the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
And or we will be in the morning fasting until noon,
Mhm.
praying. I don't see that. All this, the only thing we don't have back there, because it's a church-like group,
Mm-hmm.
it was the padlocks. we don't have much often potlucks because church is not building with kitchens like here.
Right, okay.
But we have we because it's no winter, right?
But
Mhm.
people
We
would
will
go
have-
to each other's homes all the time, and they would have picnics together.
No, but we had we call social games. Every
Mhm.
Sabbath in the
Mhm.
night, we had activities for the young people. We go one park, and this
Mhm.
is the group for the church, playing volleyball, basketball, folk soccer, whatever you want to, or just hanging out with the friends. But this is back there
Mhm.
where I come from. So I
So,
I
so,
don't see
so,
why-
so you make an excellent point. Different cultures are more relationally disposed. All right. In the culture that I grew up in, you can just swing by without being announced and just walk in and say, "Hey, I was just in the neighborhood," right? I learned that in the Maritimes, you don't do that. You don't show up unannounced. I did that once and I never did it again. I got a tongue lashing from somebody. Okay, no problem, right? So different cultures. One of the things that you mentioned, okay, Donald mentioned, and that's what I was waiting for. They would meet in homes, they would have picnics, right? So there's more of a relational aspect there, as opposed to what we have predominantly in North America. So that's why the churches will be quote unquote healthier. Because overall their society, they're more open, right, to having people over and so forth without being announced, right? So the relational need is not as glaring as it is here. But the discipleship group or the small group meeting is not solely for relational. It's also for, so where you'll have the relational, but when you do not have this as a permanent fixture, there are other things that will be missing, right? Because in the discipleship group setting, in the small group setting, that's where discipleship takes place. That's where equipping takes place, right? So there are so many things that cannot take place in the large group setting that take place in a small group setting. But there, and also vice versa, right? So that's one of the things to keep in mind. One of the things to keep in mind, in different cultures, we react to people, we are more open to people, and so people are not as lonely. They're not as lonely. North American culture is a different, especially with the advent of smartphones, and never before have people been more lonely.
But Pastor, here we just get together one day in the week, in the
Aha.
morning.
Exactly.
That's why we are in this situation.
Exactly.
We don't know anyone until the next Sabbath.
Exactly. And so the only people, so one of the things that you'll notice, I noticed that from my point of view, is that at the Wednesday night prayer meeting, even though there's very little relational there, but there's more relational contact than in the large group setting. I've noticed that those that consistently attend the Wednesday night prayer meeting are closer than those that don't.
Is there a Wednesday night prayer meeting now?
At the Halifax Church? No, we haven't had one in a very long
You're
time.
just saying in general at the Wednesday.
Yeah. So I've noticed that at Dartmouth, I've noticed that every church that I've been, that I've pastored, I've noticed that the people that attend the Wednesday night, they talk more, they're in each other's lives more. And so they're not as lonely, they're not falling through the cracks, et cetera, et cetera. So Jesus's model solves all those issues, right? But that's an excellent question. That was an excellent question and an excellent point. So traditional church, as I mentioned before, has a biblical theology for all it does, except for the way it functions. Let me give you one example. The way we do communion service, when you compare our communion service to what took place at the Last Supper, do you see any glaring differences?
Wish we had Jesus with us.
Okay, yeah. All right. But I pray that Jesus is there in the presence of the Holy Spirit, right? But if you read the Last Supper, they had a meal together, right? There was communication, right? Jesus was communicating with the disciples. They sat next to one another. There was a lot of relational exchange taking place at the Last Supper.
Because the master was there.
Yeah, but it's also the way they did it. Where in this day and age, we have a little square. They had when you read what the Apostle Paul says, read what he says in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, I believe, where he rebukes people, which doesn't make any sense in our context, for coming to communion service for the purpose of getting full.
Oh, you sweet.
Right?
They got used
Yeah, he basically told them, eat at home. So in other words, there was a possibility of coming to eat a lot.
Verse 22.
Right.
What? Do you not have houses to eat and drink in? Or do you despise the church of God and shame those who have nothing?
Exactly. So when you look at that today, you're like, that doesn't make any sense. How full are you going to get on those little, right? And the little, come on. But they had a meal. They had a substantial amount. So there's nothing wrong with the way we do communion service. It's not sin. But it's not biblical. We've changed the form, right? In that it's not a meal anymore. There isn't, contact and so forth. It's very ritualistic. And it's actually the way we do communion service is actually drawn from Roman Catholicism. That's how we do it.
Oh, because
Right.
they had
Yeah.
a little thing.
Exactly.
Will the corporate church let us do it in semi-large or smallish groups, with someone being present there to supervise that it all goes right? Foxpoint Church adds that aspect to their to their community service as well, but they have a large community hall where
Mhm.
everyone can sit, and they let you know intentionally ahead of time, don't come hungry.
Right.
We will have some food to share.
Right.
There will be extras in addition to the communion items.
Right.
But we will have a little bit of this and this,
Mm-hmm.
so that we can spend time together, talk about each other's needs, so your spiritual growth, your issues,
Right.
so that we become closer. Is this something that we will eventually be able to incorporate?
Why not? That is closer to the New Testament model than what most of our churches do. Why not?
But I
Why
think
not?
Marina means, can Lighthouse Group start doing that right away?
Well,
We are talking
Right.
behind the scenes about communion on the 22nd of February
mm-hmm.
and wondering, well, it's been stated right in the group, why can't we have communion here on the 22nd?
Mm-hmm. When Marina shared her idea, I said it was a great idea. And it won't work for this month, but for future months, I think it's a great idea, right? And what Lighthouse, because Lighthouse is new, you can do new things, and you don't have the scrutiny of the large number, or no, this is the way we do it. Our church is falling apart, right? You have, because you're part of something new, you're more open to something new. So you can go back to the way it was. Yeah, I'm absolutely.
But Pastor, to be honest, having communion in Lighthouse is, I'm falling into the part like we are branch out school, but we're not acting like a branch out school, but we are not church, but we want to act like a church, and now we bring in the communion to the
But
Lighthouse.
the communion can be part of a small group anyway.
Yeah. You can have communion service as long as an ordained elder, through the way the church operates, if the conference president gives permission, an ordained elder can serve, not can serve, can officiate communion. So it doesn't have to be, the conferences prefers the pastor, but there's some conferences that are open to, no problem, the elder can do it.
Has it always been that way?
Has it always?
Been that way? Because we went through a period of time, I don't know, it seemed like years, but it was probably 8 months where Halifax had no pastor.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't realize the elders had to be given permission. Was it always that way?
Yeah,
Did the
so,
elders let out communion?
right. So when a pastor is not present, it's basically understood that, of course, the elders are going to have to do it. Like, for example, even when it comes to baptism, right? Through special permission, it's in the church manual of the conference president, elders can baptize. At one camp meeting, I wanted the elders who had who had studied with their candidates to baptize the individuals, but the conference president at the time told me, no, you're going to baptize them. I said, okay. Yeah. Different strokes for different folks.
Right. For baptism, I think I understand that.
Mm-hmm.
For communion, when there is a pastor,
Mm-hmm.
I thought the pastor could give permission. The pastor or the board may give permission to the elders because what happens to the shut-ins, for example. We used to send elders.
Right.
Go to that shut-in, and because the pastor will not be able to take care of everything.
Right.
So I didn't know that the conference president has to approve an elder to do, an ordained elder to do that. So maybe that's
Yeah.
Okay, I'm surprised. I thought the pastor would be able to give that permission.
I'd have to verify that because that's the next, because we have done that in Halifax Church, where after communion service, we go to different houses. Ben will go visit these two people, give them communion. So it may be more of the larger group setting that you need permission, but I'll look into it again. Yeah, I'll look into it again.
Just make a comment there, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
From the previous conversation, which was a great conversation. I think what Pastor you are saying is that Lighthouse is a starting community,
Mm-hmm.
and we are starting to create a culture
Exactly.
for this community. And this is the right time to create those cultures that work well. I mean, from the experiences that Claudia just mentioned,
Mm-hmm.
those even big churches in Mexico and other places, especially where the world, it is really growing. The reason they are growing is that the principles of discipleship grouping, the
Mhm.
principles are incorporated in the larger church setting.
Right.
Like relationship,
Mm-hmm.
nurturing people.
That's
within
right.
the big community.
That's right.
Like making people, holding them and growing them, making them disciples.
Mm-hmm.
But within the largest big groups, So it is possible to do what you're suggesting, Marina. It is possible to bring those concepts, from your church,
Yep.
Claudia, and bring them at this time when we are building a culture.
Exactly.
So that it becomes part and parcel
Exactly.
of what this becomes.
Amen. 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 So the traditional church, for its function, it draws from its roots in church history, right? So I think I mentioned before, if you look up the historical uh, development of the church pew, very enlightening, right? If you look at uh, churches in old Europe, for example, where they would you enter in and they have these elevated platforms, very, very high up, and that's where the minister would go. And the people would be way down. That's tradition, that's church history, that's not biblical. At most, Jesus was on a mountaintop because there were thousands of thousands that he was teaching, right? At most. But most of the time, when you look at most of the time, Jesus was on the same level with those he was teaching, right? That's biblical, right? So we don't have it as pronounced in our churches, but you can see most of our churches, there's a platform, right? So if you've noticed at the Halifax church, during the pandemic, we stopped using the platform, and I started loving it, being on level I, and I said, guys, let's keep it here. And everyone the elders were in agreement.
The platform still has a use.
Yeah, it's
If Sachin's preaching,
yeah.
only the people at the front can see him when he's on the floor. I mean, I'm just saying there is a purpose.
Well, okay.
That's the purpose of it.
But
yes, I agree.
Even when Bruno preached,
Let's delete that from the recording.
when Bruno preached, he's taller than most. Many people couldn't see him. There was no eye contact, no.
Yeah, but I mean, they could stand on a elevated, but anyhow, I see your point. All right, so the traditional church seldomly examines the way it functions by the Bible. We just take it, this is how things go, right? In a traditional church, group ministry is only one of its programs, right? If they have group ministry. In a church of discipleship groups, it is the foundation of everything. It is basic Christian community. The first, and when we look at how the church is made, what is the basic building block of the church? Families. And notice how families are all small groups, right? And so it's with that mindset that Jesus, he took aside 12, he mentored them, he modeled for them, taught them, etc., like the family, right? Like the family, right? So in a church of discipleship groups, discipleship group is the foundation of everything. It is basic Christian community. If you do a search in the writings of Ellen White, do a search under social meeting. There's a lot of content. The Seventh-day Adventist Church began doing church in this manner, right? Small group and large group community. And they moved away from it as various pressures started to come in. They said, no, we need to do things like the other churches, et cetera. We need to have pastors doing more, right? And even though Ellen White warned the church, don't go in that direction, other individuals warned them, don't go in that direction. Eventually, after the death of Ellen White, everything changed. They basically got rid of social meeting and they started doing church like the other churches. I believe it's Russell Burrell. Russell Burrell, he was a professor at Andrews. He writes a whole series of books. Basically, he makes a brilliant comparison between, he's saying that we are spiritual Israel, and just as literal Israel demanded a king over them and rejected God's model of leading the church, spiritual Israel has done the same thing. We rejected God's model and demanded pastors over us. And we are living the results. Churches that are in decline, cold, fossilized, etc., etc., etc. All right?
Ellen White wrote that?
Oh.
Which book?
What I'll do after this, I'll share with you not only Ellen White, many, many quotes where Uriah Smith, Loughborough were basically pleading with the church, don't go in this direction. Don't do this. If you do this, this is going to happen. This is going to happen. This is going to happen. And when you look back, exactly what they warned has happened in the church. At its peak, the Seventh-day Adventist Church, for every one member, they brought in 4 individuals on a yearly basis. It was the fastest growing denomination in Christianity. For every one member that came in, 4 came in, right? Can you imagine that? And then of the 4, another 4, another 4, another 4, et cetera, et cetera. But when they moved away from the social meeting, which was the discipleship group, and they started doing church like all the other churches, we want a pastor over us, we want to have sermons every Sunday. They wanted sermon every Sunday, we want sermons every Sabbath, et cetera, et cetera. Growth plummeted. And the people became less and less active. The pastors were doing all the work, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the churches became cold and fossilized and declined. And it's all because of the sins, really, of our forefathers, right?
I'm not really quite agree with this, Pastor.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is just a new kind of sources coming to our church, because it's not you are the pastor. It's not like you're ruling onto us,
Mm-hmm.
and it's going to be always people. No matter if you don't have pastor,
Mm-hmm.
even if you have an elder,
Mm-hmm.
it's going to be always people that want to be like that,
Mm-hmm.
because that is the character for the people.
Not
And
necessarily.
They will be like that. They will be like that. They will be like that.
Not necessarily. See, the reason why, the main reason why the church began to change its structure wasn't so much because the leadership wanted to reject God's model, right? They caved into pressure. The Seventh-day Adventist Church, during the time of Ellen White, they primarily ministered to other Christians. They didn't reach the unsaved. They ministered to other Christians, right? So what started to happen is you have this small group starting to be flooded by Christians from other denominations, that the denominations that they came from, we had a pastor every single Sunday. When they came into the Seventh-day Adventist Church, they expected to have a pastor every single, Sabbath. And they weren't seeing that. The pastors were in the field planting churches. So, as the numbers started to swell, the people started to put pressure on the administration. Say, we want pastors over our churches. We want to see our pastors. Right? And then that's when, so there are many comments, for example, that Ellen White makes in regards to withholding tithe. A lot of them are in that context where people were threatening to withhold their tithe because the conference wouldn't give them a pastor. And it still happens today. It still happens. If you leave a church long enough without a pastor, they will start to tell the conference. I witnessed a church like that. They were saying, we're going to start keeping the tithe. They told that to the conference. If you don't send us a pastor. So that's what happened. That's what happened. They caved into the pressure we want it like we had it. When they started having it like they had it, they gave liberally. But there was a consequence. The consequence is the people stopped working. The people stopped working, they stopped reaching, and they started expecting professional ministers to do the work, right? When I first started ministry, I was essentially told, your responsibility is to bring people into the church and to get Bible studies. That's not my responsibility. I was told that by some people. And that was the mindset for some time. When I first came into the church, when I first started ministry, the elders that I worked with, they didn't do any Bible studies. All they did is they conducted the service, they did the welcome, they preached, but that's it. That's all they did. Recently, and I praise God, it has been changing. It's been changing. A lot of our elders, they're Bible studying with people and they're leading them to the church. It's not all on me.
Is that conference-wide or mostly just locally?
From what I've heard from other colleagues, it's on a more limited basis here, elsewhere, because they don't have the numbers that we have, right? But from what I've heard from some of my other colleagues, they're seeing the same thing, right? Where the elders are becoming more active and they're leading souls. And there's one elder that I had to caution and said, hey, make sure you make time for your wife, because he's doing all these Bible studies and leading people to Jesus. That's wonderful, right? So it's a different game. It's like we're going back to how it was. So now, as a result of all of that, I can spend more time training, which is what I was called for. I can spend more time planting churches, which is my calling, right? Yes, I do Bible studies and I preach and so forth, but my primary call, my primary purpose is an equipper and a church planter. That's my call.
So
Yeah.
I know that we got to focus on learning how to lead small groups. That's
Yeah.
why we're here.
But these are all in context, so I don't mind these questions. But yeah, we do need to move on.
I think as well as training for small groups, I think our denomination should be focusing on how to make each member more loving. Maybe seems like 95+% of the people don't want to do small groups.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, people come in our churches, especially Halifax. We've met person after person who's come to Halifax
Mm-hmm.
and say it's the coldest church they've ever been in. And
Mm-hmm.
I was shocked because I thought we were one of the friendliest churches.
Mm-hmm.
And after a dozen people that you don't know before say it,
Mm-hmm.
you start to believe it.
Right.
And I think as well as trying to get small groups going, sermons need to make people think about how they respond to those around them, each other.
I've been told that this concept, because the devil hates it, is an upward climb. The devil does not want to see this. And whenever this has been established in our church, in the Seventh-day Adventist church, the churches explode. They explode. Yes, Amos.
I I think these are great discussions, and I want to come back very briefly, Brother Don. The small group settings, they are part of what makes people be more loving,
Bingo!
more welcoming.
Bingo!
You know, of that. Now, Claudia, actually, what Pastor is saying, it is correct about the history of our church. As he said, go Google Ellen G. White material, Google social media.
Yep.
You get a lot of hits. Read through that, you'll be very surprised on how they did church then.
Yeah.
And today, actually, in line with what Pastor is saying, today North America is starting to wake up to the fact that North America division is a dying division as compared to other divisions in the world that
Yeah.
are really growing.
Yeah.
Why are they growing? There's a reason they are growing. Because they are much closer to what used to happen in the social setting. And you described it pretty well, Claudia, that you go to church and you are there with different things until evening. Those are aspects of the social meeting that used to happen then. People used to spend time together.
This
and whatnot.
exactly.
That is exactly the
Exactly.
principle of disciple group, or maybe called care group, maybe called small group, different
Right.
terminologies. Go listen to a sermon, GYC, General Youth Conference,
Mhm.
that happens in the US. It happens in December
On a yearly basis.
on a yearly basis. Go-
Generation of Youth for Christ.
Yeah, so
Right.
just go check GYC 2024, that happened a month ago, and listen to a sermon by Pastor Shane Anderson, which is called Final Charge.
Yeah. And in fact, there's a church, it's the largest Christian church on the planet. It's in South Korea. I'm not sure if I shared this story with you all. Hundreds of thousands of members in a church. The General Conference sent a delegation over to that church. Said, how is it that your members, they're happy, they're healthy, like, what's your secret? Do you know what the pastor did? He took them to his office. He took them to his office, and then he showed them his library. It's full of Ellen White's books. He said, this is why. We incorporate this woman's principles. Yeah. So the others, they're leaving us behind with what was given to us at birth, right? Church of Discipleship groups. It is last days ecclesiology. Ellen White said, I'm going to paraphrase, if we refuse to meet in small groups, at some point we're going to be forced into small groups. And we got a taste of that during the pandemic, right? We were forced into small groups, right? It's the same thing is going to happen. It is last days ecclesiology. This is how God is going to finish the work. Is inspired by the Holy Spirit all over the world, different denominations, right? They're just eating this stuff up. It encompasses many theological streams, but it requires a paradigm shift. And this is why it's so difficult for so many churches, because it requires change. As you know, change is hard. And every church, and when I'm speaking of church, I'm not speaking about the people, okay? I'm going to use church in a different way. Every church has a holy cow. I call them a holy cow or holy cows. If as a leader, as a pastor goes in and he touches that holy cow, he or she is done. You're in trouble. And you don't know, it could be something small. It's like, nah, this is not sick. They don't need this here. Boom. Okay? Change is difficult. It requires a paradigm shift. So not everybody can adjust to this, right? Not everybody can adjust to this. In a traditional church, the building is the church. Let's go to church, right? Where in a church of discipleship groups, the people are the church. So when we go to church, church may be at Amos's house. Church may be at Bruna's house. Church may be on Wednesday. Church may be on Friday or Monday or Sunday. It's church. And also Sabbath. Large community and small community. Okay? The basic premise of a church of discipleship group. What's the basic premise? It is composed of small groups in which every member belongs, of 3 to 12 members per group. Okay? And there's a fascinating study, I don't have it with me now, there's a fascinating that was done with the number 12. It's just amazing. Of course, we're dealing with God, right? But it's just amazing how much depth there is even in the numbers, the number 12 and so forth. And so to make it quick with this study, what was discovered is that with the number 12 individuals, when you exceed that number, the lines of communication begin to break down. But up to 12, the lines of communication, and it's based on an incredible study, right? And so no wonder why Jesus chose 12, right? He chose 12, okay? The group is for nurture, edification, support, and ministry to one another. It's a family, okay? It is a family. Mm-hmm. Oh, I forgot to edit that. That was a mistake. Actually, it's 3 to 12. Yeah, it's 3 to 12. I edited in these slides, but obviously it didn't come out when I printed. Okay, so the group is also for reaching out to those outside the church. It becomes a missionary venture, bringing unchurched friends, relatives, etc., to Jesus in the context of a loving, supportive family. We start to get a little taste of that with the passion groups that we started, right? Just started planning a meeting, and look how difficult. I had to keep calling, okay, guys, we need to wrap it up. Why? Because people are enjoying each other's company. They're enjoying, right? Both are needed. We need the relational and we need the theoretical. We need both, right? So the group is for reaching out. So one of the problems, I think that was mentioned by Donald, house churches, they're not missionally minded, right? They don't start up with so that we're coming together for the purpose of reaching out. It's part of our DNA. Where a church of discipleship groups, you have a group of individuals who agree to grow to no more than 10 Seventh-day Adventists or 10 like-minded Christians. And they leave 2 spaces or 2 chairs on the couch or whatever for 2 non-Seventh-day Adventists or non-Christians. Always, right? So their intent is to make disciples, hence discipleship group. So they always leave room for disciples. They always leave room for new disciples or potential disciples. Okay? The types of churches, program-based churches, right? Maintenance-oriented, and they're not particularly mission-oriented, okay? It's all about the program, right? It's all about the program. Programs. But people are unhappy, people are lonely, people are depressed, people are breaking down, and so forth. But as long as the programs are good, as long as the music, right? Great praise team, right? Great preaching, right? Right, exactly. That's what matters. Okay? Other types of church, you have transitional churches who are innovative, open to change, and they have a growing mission orientation. You have discipleship group-based churches. And this is my prayer for Lighthouse. The group is foundational. Other ministries support the groups. So somebody asked, so in a church of discipleship, do you have a Sabbath school department? Of course you do. Do you have elders? Of course you do. Do you have personal ministries? Of course you do. But each elder or each Sabbath school teacher or superintendent, they're all part of a discipleship group, which is a permanent fixture. It's a permanent family in the church. It's how they do church. Small groups and large groups, a two-wing church, a balanced experience. The traditional church location is the building alone. The New Testament church, as I mentioned before, house to house and in the temple courts. House to house and in the temple courts. In our context, the temple courts is the gymnasium.
I always wanted to go to Jerusalem.
Right? Our context, the house is the gymnasium, or the Halifax church, it's the Halifax building. That's the temple courts. House to house is your homes. Okay? Relationships. In the traditional church, we've all lived it. Intimacy is rare, and there's little transparency. Right? Little transparency. People hear about this cataclysmic fall. How did that happen? How did their marriage break down? Because you have no clue what was going on behind closed doors. But when you're meeting with people on a regular basis, you say, hey, you know what? They seem to be having some issues, right? You're able to notice those things. You know, let me go talk to her, or let me go talk to him, or let's pray together. Large group setting, I can cover up and I can hide and hide and hide, and you won't know a thing. You won't know what is going on. But a small group setting, it's more challenging to hide. Far more challenging to hide. New Testament church, intimate relationships, and it encourages encouragement and accountability are emphasized. We want to be transparent. We want to be transparent. We want to be held accountable, right? There was one presentation that I shared with some of you a while ago, and it was a series of questions that they would ask each other in the social meeting. You would not hear questions like that being welcomed today. Questions like, when have you last sinned? What secret thing are you withholding from? Really? Right? But that's the way they did church. They trusted each other. They knew each other. Yes, Claudia.
Yeah, I think that there is one of the challenges of North America. I see the individualism, like keeping your things for yourself, and also keeping the priorities, like yourself as your main priority, and then your family, and then the community.
Right.
Keeping up this mindset is something that probably is holding North America behind.
Absolutely.
And this is probably one of the challenges we have to face here. This is one of the differences where I can see when I compare with other areas that I know in the world. So we don't want to destroy the culture here, but we need to know that the culture that we will have in heaven is different from the individualism.
That's right. Absolutely.
So I'm sitting here as maybe one of three people in the room from North America. Wonder why do the immigrants come here and want to fit into this problem? Why do the immigrants should come and not adapt the bad things about us?
Well, okay. This is what I'll say. This is what I
And
noticed.
also, immigrants come here and say,
Mhm.
okay, I want to get settled. I don't want to take part in church.
Right.
I'm too busy trying to get settled. I don't want to be a Pathfinder leader. I'm too busy getting settled. I'm not ready to continue being an elder in Halifax Church.
Right.
They don't compromise.
Yeah. Okay. There were some brethren that I met in a particular church. And they told me, Pastor, when I was back home, we had church from morning to evening. I was in the choir, I was this, we had Pathfinders, we had AY, I was in church all day, right? And busyness was keeping them, but not relational intimacy. That's what was keeping them. So when they left that setting and they came to a place where they didn't have the busyness, they fell away from the church. As opposed to individuals I've met who had relational intimacy back home, but very few that I've met, right? So that's what I'm saying. It's a worldwide issue, right? They had relational intimacy. They came into the North American setting and they were like, whoa, what's this? Like, no one's inviting us for lunch, no one. But because it kept them, it held them. And so they didn't fall away until they sought out another group setting. They were hungry because that's what they came from.
But Pastor,
Yeah.
since I came to Canada, Halifax Church was main with white people.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't so much immigrant. It's always immigrant, but
Right.
it wasn't that much like right now. I think most of the person in Halifax are immigrants.
Right.
It was a white people,
Mhm.
and I never see people like I don't. This is the cloudiest experience that she had. I don't think North American people is self-finished. This school that we are here now is because people were not self-finished. They put all the time. If you look at the story how this school became,
Mhm.
it's because it was people working for this thing happen. I don't think that was self-finished.
No.
And in my experience, I was I received these people. I have to go to my funeral's mother in Mexico, and I was there 3 months. And when I became, the house was needing repairs,
Mm-hmm.
and the brothers and sisters for the Halifax Church, they helped Donald,
Mm-hmm.
and one member, she doesn't even come to Halifax Church, but she was in Halifax Church. They make the room, everything was ready for me and the new baby to come along.
Yeah.
And I never see after these people, some of them they die,
Right.
some of them they don't come more to church. I don't see that much kindness. And I feel like these people were moving, doing so much for Halifax Church.
Yep.
But now in Halifax Church, I feel like I wanted to do something. We're not doing nothing.
One of the challenges I see that Halifax has faced is for example, Carolyn Beaner. There's nary an individual, new person that has come to the church at one point that didn't encounter the love of Carolyn Beaner, right? Right? You come in, Caroline, like oh, do you need a coat? You need this? Invite to their home. But much of Caroline's generation, they're gone now, or they're sick, and no one has come in to fill the void. Right, no one has come to fill the void. Right, but part of the reason why is because they don't feel like it's their church. So they don't feel like they have the freedom to, I'm going to step into Caroline's shoes and I'm going to do what Caroline used to do. I'm going to step into this person and they don't feel, so that's the catch-22 that we're in right now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's correct.
But even the people that have been in that church through those generations don't feel like it's their church anymore.
Yeah, it's true.
Like Does
All right.
anybody feel like it's their church?
Yeah, that's correct. That's
Discipling. The traditional church, lectures, teaching, seminars. Like I think I mentioned to you, I think you've heard it before. We Adventists were known as seminar junkies, right? Oh, seminar? Oh, where, when, where, right? And then we take the book and it collects dust, right? But the New Testament model was personal. It's based on mentoring and modeling, just like Jesus did. He taught, and then he showed them. They would see Jesus praying. The disciples came to Jesus and said, Jesus, teach us how to pray. He said, in this manner, pray. Our Father which art in heaven, right? Etc. Jesus, he taught, he mentored, and he modeled. In the traditional church, spiritual gifts are either ignored, downplayed, or limited to professional ministers. Right? Me. My profession is ministry. I studied pastoral ministry. I have a bachelor's of pastoral ministry, and I'm completing my master's of pastoral ministry. I'm a professional minister. So in some churches where it's just one church, one pastor to a large church, the pastor does most of the preaching. Some of the elders do very little. It's starting to change now. Starting to change.
But Pastor, this is just North America? Because this is just happening in North America? Because back way in home, our pastor, you barely see him preaching.
Right.
He was always, like you say, planting church.
Yep.
Making the small groups.
More, the closer you are to that model, the healthier the church is, and the more there's church growth. That's why the Latin Americans churches are exploding, because they're closer. That's why the churches in Africa, different places in Africa, they're exploding. But if you visit some of those churches, if they begin to adopt the other practices, you'll see they'll start to decline. Because it's not the people, it's the principles, right? In the Church of Discipleship groups, the gifts are employed by all believers to build up the body. This is why we went through that exercise. We went through that exercise because when we come to the point where we have officers in the church, one of the primary indicators that this person is suited for this is their gifts. Because that's what God has placed the gifts for that reason. Primary commitments, traditional church, to enlarge the institution. At one point, I believed my mission as a pastor, or the mission of the church, was to baptize. To baptize. Baptize. And it's like that in many churches, in many conferences. I think I was telling you in a particular conference in Latin America, they gave the pastors, this was in Brazil, they gave the pastors quotas. You have to fulfill this quota each month. If you don't fulfill this quota each month, you could be fired. Do you know what some pastors were doing? They were going to the obituary and taking the names of deceased people to add to their list and submitting it to the conference. I read that in Ministry Magazine. Okay? That's when you have a church that's just focused on the large institution, right? You're focused on church growth, right? Whereas the New Testament, the primary commitment is to make disciples, increase the kingdom, and foster Christian community. That's our primary commitments. Make disciples, increase the kingdom, and to foster Christian community. Yes.
Sorry about so many questions. I I don't know. Maybe you will explain it in the further slides, but just in case to not have it missed, when we have smaller groups that become the church, we will need to give the small groups some freedom to decide certain things
Yep.
on lower or medium level,
Yep.
so that to free up space and time for the pastor and elders to do their spiritual and ministerial and evangelistic work.
Yep.
How does it work in the highly structured Adventist church when little groups make decisions that usually need to go through different levels of approval first?
Okay, so first of all, a church of discipleship groups, because their ecclesiology is based on the New Testament, you don't have the bureaucracy that you have in the traditional model. There isn't a necessity, there isn't as much of a necessity for that level of bureaucracy. One of the reasons why we have so much bureaucracy is because there's so much unhealthiness in the church. So as a result of we have to have all these safeguards. All these safeguards. But if you have a church that's based on healthy Christian, it doesn't mean it's perfect. The New Testament church wasn't perfect. But overall, you had a church that was largely based on there's small healthy communities that cared for each other, that loved each other, and so forth. They didn't have the bureaucracy that we have now. So the more we go towards the original model, the less bureaucracy we will have.
And it will be approved and allowed.
Yes, absolutely. So one of the reasons why, as I mentioned, one of the reasons why we have so much bureaucracy is because we have all this unhealthiness that you have to be careful here, you have to be careful, oh no, you need to be careful there, you need to be careful who preaches, because if this person preaches, I know this person's a preacher of error. But when you have a church that's in the Word, and when I'm talking about church, the people, they're in the Word. God forbid a false teacher comes up. They're going to figure him out. Is it you? Out. You're not going to preach that, right? But when you have a church where there's so much unhealthiness, people are not in the Bible, they're biblically illiterate, right? You have to be very protective against false teachers and false doctrine and this and this. You need all those levels of bureaucracy. So the closer we are to the model, the more we can begin to dispense with that. And so that's why, for example, when you go to churches like in Mexico or what have you, where the elders are the pastors, right? You have a pastor who has 11 churches. And what the pastors will do, they'll come in. I just came by to see you all. Is the Lord good? Yes, all right, bless it. Then he's gone. And then they don't see him for 3 weeks or a month. Maybe they'll get a sermon from the pastor once every 2 months or every 3 months. But the elders are like pastors. They hold up the church, et cetera, et cetera. That's closer to our model. It's closer to our model, where the pastor has to do everything. I praise God it's not the case anymore here. It's not the case. When I first came, it was. I had to do everything. My phone was constantly going off the hook. Oh my goodness. Right? All right. Primary leadership tasks in the traditional church, building and directing programs. In the New Testament church, model the life of a disciple via relationship and active ministry. That's the primary tasks of leadership. So if the primary task of leadership is to model the life of a disciple, the relationship and active ministry. How much easier is it to grow leaders in the New Testament model or the traditional model? The New Testament model.
Traditional doesn't grow leaders.
You hire leaders. Yeah, suppresses leaders. You hire leaders, and that's it. But the New Testament model, one of the key elements, and it's I'm just so excited about this, because the highlights of my Christian experience has been being part of discipleship groups. We started one when we were in Montreal, and in a church that did not experience one baptism for 10 years. Okay? 10 years. The church started baptizing people through our one discipleship group. Right? And everyone could see that those of us who were, we wanted to start other groups with the other people, we don't have time for this. But everyone started to see that we were closer with one another. We were closer with one another, right? That's just when I was in PEI. The majority of people that I baptized in PEI was through a discipleship group that we started. It just works because it's Jesus's model. Yeah.
And that's the point, like, it's not the goal that's the issue. You were telling the story about, like, the goal but in terms of baptisms.
Right.
It's not the goal that is the issue. It's the gap in the mindset. Of course, you told the story with a threat, right?
Right.
It should never happen. But baptism is something good.
Right.
The point is, the goal is there for you to use the right strategy to get there.
That's right. Absolutely. Absolutely. The primary pastoral task in the traditional model is to preach good sermons. I've said it before because I've heard it from others. A pastor can be a scoundrel, and I mean that in every word. But if he's a good preacher, conference will hire him. He's dynamic, conference will hire him. Mean-spirited, like rough, but he's dynamic. He can command. Conferences will hire him. I've seen it. Okay, I've seen it. But the New Testament, the primary pastoral task is to equip and disciple believers for ministry via relationships and active ministry. And that's the model that I subscribe to. I love to preach. Sometimes I'm preaching in the shower. I love to preach. But it's just because I'm consumed. But my primary role is to equip and disciple believers for ministry. That's my primary role. And to plant churches. The leadership test, what you know, MDiv, right? Doctor of Pastoral Ministry, D-Min. Oh yeah, he's got a D-Min, right? The New Testament church, character. How do you treat people? Heart for service and fruit. And when I'm speaking about fruit, I'm not talking about baptisms. Healthy disciples. That's fruit. Because Jesus said he wants fruit that what? Remains. We have been good in the church, bring a lot of fruit, but the fruit don't remain.
Pastor, in the New Testament, the letters that Paul wrote,
Mm-hmm.
you can find in the different churches. Sometimes he was talking about some problems
Yep.
in the church.
Oh,
And
yes.
if we're talking, they are
Serious problem.
disciples.
Yep.
If we're talking about the. So when you explain to us the concept of disciples,
Mm-hmm.
it sounds very nice. It sounds like we should be there,
Mhm.
all of us, right? But in reality, uh, we are going to be facing that. Like, it's not going to be like, you know, until Jesus come, and in heaven it's going to be like that, right?
On this side of glory, nothing we do will be perfect. We can have a church that follows all the principles of the New Testament, but it's still not going to be perfect, because at the basic building block of that church is sinners saved by grace. But we're still sinners. We still wrong each other. We still hurt each other. So nothing on this side of glory is going to be. But Jesus' model is the best for this context, right? Because of sin, because of all the degradation, this is the best model. This is the best model. All right. Source of staffing, trained professional clergy. Source of staffing, discipleship cycle where leaders are raised up within churches and tested before they are set apart. That's what the New Testament did. In the context of a discipleship group, as discipleship group leaders, one of your primary tasks is to immediately identify your potential replacer. You're going to be seeing, there's going to be someone, they're exhibiting qualities. This person is the leader of the next group. And we're going to cover that a bit later. It's based on discipleship, right? It's based on discipleship. You're immediately, day one, you are looking to identify the next leader. Sorry. Prayer life, in the traditional setting, individual choice, limited, New Testament, heavy emphasis. The focus of the traditional church, the congregation, right? Have you ever heard that expression, don't rock the boat?
Yep.
Right? One of the, some well-meaning presidents will come in and, and tell a new pastor, don't rock the boat. The church is, the conference is receiving a lot of tithe from this church, so don't rock the boat. Okay? Not too much truth. Okay? The New Testament, the focus is small groups, meeting in homes, and this needs to be edited, and the large group setting. Both congregation and small groups. Teaching in the traditional setting subscribe to distinctive beliefs of this church. New Testament apply the scriptures to basic needs and relationships. Support system in the traditional setting, pastor or staff. In the New Testament, small band of believers. Okay? So I'm going to go through these. I want to go, you can look at the rest yourself. I want to get more towards the end. I didn't want to go more than 2 hours. Let's keep going. Okay, so some of the contrast, all right? So some of the contrasts are exaggerated yet real, right? And it's important. No one currently, clergy or laity, which by the way is not biblical, you won't find the word clergos in the Bible. It's a Greek word from Plato's, from ancient times, but it's not biblical. You'll find laos, or laity. And in the Bible, we're all part of the laity. I'm part of the laity. Pastor Dave is part of the laity. We're all part of the laity. But in the pagan system that invaded the church, it separated the clergy from the cattle. They actually called the people cattle. Okay? No one currently is to blame. This is something that we have inherited, right? No one is to blame for the present state, but by God's grace, we don't have to continue the same way. Structure of a church of discipleship groups. The group multiplies by body life evangelism. Okay, so how does it multiply? When you're speaking about body life, as I mentioned, maximum of 12. All right, maximum of 12 with room for 2 non-believers. When the group goes beyond 12, they start a new group, right? But I want to add that they only start a new group when a leader is trained to lead that new group, right? So if the leader of the first discipleship group is negligent in raising up another leader, they can't divide because you don't have someone to lead the other group. You have to have another leader. But if they've been faithful to their task and they've discipled, they've mentored someone, they've discipled, they show them how, when it's time to divide, okay, the existing leader moves on to the new group. And the new person leads the old group. Okay? The existing leader, the original leader, takes on the challenge of the new group. And the new leader takes on the challenge of leading a group that he's already accustomed to or she's accustomed to. But now, as they continue that body life, that new leader has to identify another leader. And when it's time for them to divide, then they move on to the new group, and the person that they've mentored leads the old group. And it continues and continues and continues and continues, right? So you can have a structure like this. You have one discipleship group, matures into 2 discipleship groups. Where you come to the point where you have 5 discipleship groups led by a zone coach, right? So at this point, if we had just started with one group, for example, we would just have one group. But we would be starting at this point where I'd be serving the role as supervisor zone coach, right? And you're the leaders of your groups, okay?
So the group is the one we form? This is the group?
The groups are the one that you form.
The one we working this morning?
We're going to have to see. We're going to have to agree. How are we going to do this, right? What happened with me is when we started our first discipleship group in Montreal, God spoke to me and he told me, ask this person, ask this person, ask this person. He led me. And out of all the people that I went, only one person declined. And they only declined because of their work schedule. And even though they declined, once in a while they showed up.
Were you a pastor then?
No, I was not. And so, and we had, it's the highlight of my spiritual experience. It's the highlight of my spiritual experience. So we have the 5x5 model, which we get from Jethro, right? You remember the advice that he gave to Moses? It's based on this model, where you have, where Moses suggested a plan of placing leaders over 10s, over 50s, over hundreds, and over thousands. A fully developed church of discipleship groups works the same way. It's the same idea. So, for example, here, step 1, you have a discipleship group leader, and there's 10 people in the group, okay? There's obviously more than 10 people here, right? But notice it says 10 people, okay? they have between 5 or 15, once again, that has to be edited. Or he or she is a leader of tens, according to what Jethro told Moses. All right? Where you have a zone coach who oversees the group and their leaders. He's a leader of 50s, according to the Jethro model, right? That would be more my role, okay? My role would be to help you in your leadership of your groups, okay? Now, it grows where you have a zone pastor who is overseeing 250 people, right? He's overseeing 4 zone coaches, and each zone coach oversees 5 discipleship groups, right? You get to the point where you have a district pastor who has 1 to 5 zone pastors, and you see how it grows, right? So this is what we call about body life. The church doesn't grow because it's time to have an evangelistic series, right? People cower. Oh no, I need to. No, the church grows because the discipleship group grows. And they grow. That's how the church grows. And it's exponential. Until you have a structure like this, where you have a district pastor, where this individual is a leader of thousands, according to the Jethro model, where they're overseeing zone pastors, who oversee zone coaches, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But here's the key thing about this model. Every single individual is part of a discipleship group. Because we all need nurture. We all need relational care, right? A district pastor is part of 12. He or she is part of a discipleship group. Zone pastor, et cetera, et cetera. The pastor of the church oversees the entire church. He or she is the leader of thousands, right? And so remember, the church is not the building, it's the people. So as I told you in South Korea, this is how they're able to have over 100,000 people that meet in like a stadium when they meet in large group setting. But they consistently meet in small group setting. And it's healthy and growing exponentially, continues to grow. So a church of discipleship groups is not a denial of a need for programs. You still have programs, but it's not program-centric. The focus is not programs. The focus is people. It is a strategy for a people-centered and community-based program. It is not the absence of departments, as I told you before. You still have departments. It is a structure with departments that support the system of groups. It is not only small groups. It is a system of groups, congregations, and celebration. It is not a group of independent house churches. It is a vision-driven movement of people living in basic Christian communities. Yes.
When you say we're not focusing on the programs, we're focusing on the people. I'm trying to visualize a church with this model. Mm-hmm. So you, in the beginning, you say it's not necessary to have sermons every Sabbath. Mm-hmm. So what is a program under this model? How is the program? I mean, if you don't center on the program, you center on the people, what are we going to do? I just sit down with them and talking and make relationships? Or what is the issue?
As I mentioned, in the large group setting, there is preaching. But it's not focused on preaching. It's not in the early Seventh-day Adventist church, they didn't have a sermon every Sabbath. They had testimonies. They met in large group setting. They met for prayer. They had on Sabbath morning, they had a time for prayer. They had a time for testimonies. What they often did is they had like a large group Bible study where people were digging in the Bible. Wasn't someone just preaching and you're listening. The person would, and I've learned from this, this is what I am going to be doing. When I preach at Halifax, you're going to see a difference. I'm asking questions and I'm waiting. I'm not going to give you the answers. I want you to find the answers in the Bible. So it may be less content, but the people will learn more, right? That's what they did in the Adventist church. And so in a church, once again, a group of people, not the building, that focuses on people and not the program, there's room for amateur preachers. There's room for, he didn't do that great a job. Yeah, but he's learning or she's learning. That's how we disciple people, right? There's room for, they practice. We're not saying that people who just wing it, but they practiced, they sounded good. Then when they went up, they were all nervous and they sang and they fell apart. That's okay. But a structure that's focused on the program, it has to sound perfect. Because it's about how we present ourselves. It's about our appearance, right? There are many churches, many evangelical churches are starting to collapse, for example, because they invested so much in programming and the word I was looking for professional musicians, right? It's a concert, it's a show. And so no one else gets to share their talents. No one else gets to learn how to, right? It's a show. Top-notch speaker. There's only a few top-notch speakers. No one else gets to exercise the gift that God has given them to preach. So in the church of discipleship groups, there is preaching, right? There is preaching. And the people who will do the preaching are the people that have the gift for preaching. And of course, they're committed to Christ, et cetera, because you can have the gift and not be committed to Christ, right? That's a difference. That's what it means to be focused on people and not just programs. Doesn't have to be perfect because we're focused on mentoring. We're focused on, I love what Jose does with the young guys. That's mentorship, right? He teaches them, he taught them, right? They made mistakes. Like when they were doing it at Halifax, it's like, they would see mistakes, but it got better. It got better until what? Jose could pick up and leave. That's the same thing we want in every aspect in the church. That's the same thing we want in every aspect. So in the context, for example, of the church department, it's the same mindset. It's a missional mindset where the Sabbath school superintendent in their Sabbath school council, they're looking for who's going to be my replacement. Who's going to replace me in 2 years? I'm going to make sure I spend time with that person, mentor that person, so that in 2 years, they can be the next leader. Same thing with the head elder. Head elder, he's looking at the other elders and he's looking for this person, I can see this person has the leadership qualities that are needed. And then it continues. When that new person becomes the elder, they continue the same cycle. When that new, et cetera, et cetera. That's a church of discipleship. That's a missional church. And that way, everyone gets a chance to serve. No one is left out. No one is left out.
But the person who training is not the one decide who goes there. I mean, I can train in someone, but it's not up to me if that person is want to take my position. We had a board commission who choose the person. So
Right. Yeah.
I don't know.
But whoever's the current leader, if they see somebody who has potential, they're gonna share that with the other
Yeah,
leaders
but
in
in
the
the
church.
end,
Exactly.
yeah, but
Exactly.
it's not you who want to decide who.
No, but you mentor your best candidates that are under you.
Okay.
You pass on. You.
Let me give you an example. This is a more limited example in our context. When I first met Bruno and I began to talk with him and I visited in his home, I said, this guy needs to be an elder in our church. I said, Bruno was elder material. So when nominating committee came up, what do you think I did? What do you think I did? Exactly. The same thing that the Sabbath school superintendent does, the health ministry leader does. You know what? It's time for me to go. I've led for 2 years, but here is someone, she is ready. I've spent time with her, I've mentored her, she's ready. You vouch for the person.
That's good. If that happened, it's good.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, principles and strengths of a church of discipleship groups, it allows for total mobilization of every member. We're treating that spiritual gifts seriously. We're going to do our best to make sure that no one is dormant. You're putting your gifts to work. Because the purpose of the gifts, and at the end, I'm going to give one of you a challenge. All right? The purpose of the gifts is for the perfecting of the church, for the unity of the church. So if the gifts are not in action, is that going to impair the unity of the church? Is that going to impair the perfecting of the church? Yeah, it's going to retard that. But if the gifts are in action, because that's why Jesus gave it, you'll find that in Ephesians chapter 4, the church is more solid. That's the purpose of the gifts. So we're focusing on that. Reaches out through body life, relationship. Herbert Butterfield, a well-known historian, said the strongest organizational unit in the world's history would appear to be that which we call a cell, because it is a remorseless self-multiplier, is exceptionally difficult to destroy, can preserve its intensity of local life, while vast organizations quickly wither when they are weakened at the center, right? So for example, you take the Halifax church. If, for example, you hit the Halifax church, the church building is destroyed, a lot of people who are dependent on the building will fall away. But a church of discipleship groups, or like the New Testament church, okay, they killed one disciple, but you had thousands. They couldn't, this is the church. This is why Jesus said, the church that I establish, even the gates of hell will not prevail against it. That's why. It couldn't be extinguished. Yes?
A short testimony. In my hometown, First Baptist Church, 20,000 members, a block-wide church, strong, one of the strongest, if not the strongest church in town. And how they work together.
Cells.
20,000 people.
20,000 cells. So you can grow to, like, for example, in South Korea, over 100,000 members. And that was years ago. I don't know what the numbers are now. But it's healthy because of cells. Okay? It can defy the power of governments. Is the appropriate level of prying open to any status quo? Whether we take early Christianity or 16th century Calvinism or modern communism. This seems the appointed way by which a mere handful of people may open a new chapter in the history of civilization. The end.